to be mindful of who I'm making the cocktail for. So instead of doing your traditional tequila or vodka or something, I'm going to bring out some of my favorite product, which is this Slate protein shake. First step, little peanut butter. I'm going to rim this. You allergic to anything? Chia seeds or peanut butter?
Just peanuts and cocoa.
You're just allergic to everything I'm using? Some chia seeds?
I'm not allergic to chia seeds. I think you got some in your beard. I just can't tell.
What an odd choice for the rim.
Here's what we're doing. We have oat milk, powdered protein. Here we go. Avocado in. Banana, a little peanut butter. Mix it up. Oh, come on now.
Looks good.
Oh, right to the top. You get that first
Drop on my shirt.
All right. Cheers to us.
Cheers.
Thanks for coming today.
Anytime.
Come on, man. Huh?
Very good.
That's awesome.
Get ready for a great podcast, folks. Where's mine?
Let's do it. You want it?
I guess not.
No.
Let's just go. Let's just go to this podcast.
You didn't realize your name is John and he's Johnny. It's Johnny Drinks.
Johnny.
You know, I don't want to be the one
It's
saying
not John Drinks.
So wait, you've been in the industry, what, 30, you were in the industry 32 years? How long?
I got in there. Well, I consider myself still in it just because of my consulting, but I got in 86. So what is that? 96, 06, 16. So, I mean, 31 years at
Right.
corporate companies and then 5 years doing consulting. So 36.
Are you still working with them?
I
No,
just
it's
finished up.
consulting work.
No, not with Wells Fargo.
Right.
I do work with other mortgage companies.
That's what I thought. Okay. But in mortgage, you're saying?
Yeah.
32 plus years. Wow.
Yeah. 23 of those years. 23?
26 with Wells
26 with Wells.
91 to 2017.
Right. And you are a veteran of the industry, which is why, in large part, we're here today and we're going to talk about something I think is really relative and relevant in the sense it's a market today, real estate market, where a lot of people, especially young people, don't understand what is going on. And it's confusing. It could be very exciting because the thought of buying a house is always fun. Yet we went through something in 2008. And I don't know if you're hearing this lately from any of your friends or just people in general. They say, well, you kind of went through this already. And I'm like, well, what we went through in 2008 was contrastingly different than what we're going through today. They're not even close, right? Would you agree? Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. 2008 was an anomaly.
Right.
You know, it was a result of a change in the mortgage industry, which is when mortgage-backed securities were created, and those mortgage-backed securities sort of got out of hand. Right. There was lots of issues, probably more detailed in the podcast, but you know, there were rating agencies involved, there were banks involved, there was obviously a lot of greed involved, and it all came to a head, and the financial markets imploded, and it caused the housing crash of 2008 because, quite frankly, a lot of people ended up purchasing homes that weren't qualified or shouldn't have bought a house.
Right, exactly.
What we're going through today is, quite frankly, a normal cycle in the economy, right?
Yeah.
Economies have recessions, they have booms, and so we came out of we were in a little bit of a boom period prior to COVID, and then COVID accelerated it with all the money the Fed threw into the economy through stimulus, and now we're on the downside of that cycle. So
you know what's when I think back, and this is a historic snapshot talking about 2008 and a forecast of kind of where we are today, what that might bring for a young person that wants to buy a house. And for us personally, a trip down memory lane, right? So you and I have known each other for the better part of 30 years. I had the pleasure of working for you, with you, and at a company that was very instrumental, contributing to a lot of things, home ownership being one of them, and some of what had gone on in 2008. So this is such, if I take a trip down memory lane, I run into all this. I run into some of the things that were not so much fun to experience, right? When you feel like the world around you is crashing and you have to worry about your family and providing and your coworkers that, you know, it's very unnerving. And those who've been in the financial industry know it in different moments with Wall Street and some of the episodes that have occurred there. So when you think about 2008, Give me one thing that you would associate with that time emotionally. Rewind it and put yourself in there for a moment.
So from my position in 2008, leading up to it, there were a lot of things happening that just didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And if you watch the movie The Big Short, you'll see some of the people who were looking into it were saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. Now, I wasn't saying it didn't make sense from a mortgage-backed securities perspective. I was saying it didn't make sense from being an industry veteran and watching people I knew join organizations, mortgage companies, and providing mortgages to people that didn't qualify. And I was looking at what was tried and true, right? You need to have a down payment. You need to have good credit. You need to have a job. And all of a sudden, it was, no problem. We got them a mortgage. They don't have a job. And it just didn't make any sense.
Right.
And for the better part of probably 2 years, I felt like I was speaking to my team and others about this can't last. It's going to go away. It's going to implode. This is crazy. And similar to The Big Short, it just wasn't going away. And I was getting very frustrated, losing business, losing team members, losing market share, going, what is going on?
Right.
Now, it eventually imploded. And I will tell you, I'll give credit to a former boss of mine. Her name is Kara Hyden, who was president of Wells Fargo. She came to me once and she said something that still really sticks with me. She said, Greg, life is fair, just not in your time frame, which meant eventually things flush out.
Right.
Not as quickly as you'd like them to. And it's advice I would give to a lot of your listeners, right? If you're in your 20s, you're not happy with your boss, your company, it eventually flushes out, probably not as fast as you'd like it to.
Correct.
So for me in 2008, I just remember, waiting for things to kind of get back to the way they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
When you said you were frustrated and losing business, what do you mean by that? You mean employees were leaving Wells to go somewhere else? To why?
Sure. So if you're a mortgage loan officer, you're paid based on the amount of business you do. So if you brought in 10 loans at Wells Fargo and we denied 3 of them because of credit issues, employment issues, and you went to work someplace else and they weren't denying any, you could make more money. So I was losing people, and then when they were showing me, well, Greg, here's what I could do at another company that you're not willing to approve, and I looked at it, I said, well, of course we're not. It makes no sense. We have no ability to understand if this person can make these payments.
So Wells was holding that standard still?
Yes.
During that time?
Yes. Now I know, fast forward, Wells has had a lot of issues. When you go back to 2008, 2009, we really did things the right way, especially in the mortgage company.
Yeah, that's a very important point, despite public opinion, and you can hear in his voice and his body language that this is emotional, right? These are things that affect guys from our generation because we went through this. Differently, but the thread is I watch The Big Short, I watch Too Big to Fail, and my heart palpitates. Like I go right back to a place where my world is ending. And I remember you specifically when the rubber hit the road. It was October 2008, and we'll talk maybe some more of those details, but our stock price was plummeting. Citibank plummeting. Chase plummeting. Right now, do you remember where we were approximately by stock price prior to October of 2008? Even go January 2008.
Yeah, I'd just be guessing, but I was going to say we were probably in the mid 30s or so,
right.
and I believe we dropped to a low of about $7.
Yeah,
I want to pull that up.
So we were. You're right. We were around $30-something. And I asked you, as we started going through this, wait a second, I'm doing automatic stock purchase, 401ks, heavily invested, right? We have all these things that are vulnerable, and people around us were pulling out, making decisions. Chase stock dropped, Citibank, Chase went down like $2, right? And I remember asking you, what are you doing? What are we going to do? He's like, well, if it was a good buy at $35, it's a great buy at $7. Keep buying. And I'm like, all right. This is why you align yourself with people that you trust, you can count on, and that truly have your interest in mind. And so with that being said, All right, I kept buying stock. And then look what happened. And it went up as high as $60-something by the time we got out of there, right, in the better markets. But to that end is just, again, one of those things where everyone else is running, hiding, panicking. Cooler heads prevail. And that's a life lesson for a lot of reasons. And so, I don't know if we've ever really talked about that, but that was a pretty profound moment for me personally.
Well, it's a combination. I think Warren Buffett probably says it best, right? These times create opportunities, but I would just caution your listeners. They're not blind opportunities. During the S&L crisis, you could have bought City Federal stock, for 50 cents, which was the biggest S&L in New Jersey, only to lose it all because they went under.
Right.
When the financial crisis hit, you could have went out there and tried to buy stock in Bear Stearns or get involved with Lehman Brothers, and they went under, right? So when those opportunities create themselves, anytime there's turmoil in the market, there's always opportunities. But you do have to find those companies that are strong and have a good balance sheet in addition to that being a buying opportunity.
Okay, so now we find ourselves learning from leveraging opportunities, let's say in 2008. Well, here we are in 2023. Where are the opportunities? Where do you feel we can take this experience and leverage it best?
Well, as I said, 2008 was an anomaly. So you really have to go back, sort of to the 60s to take a look at the facts, right? Look at mortgage interest rates, look at the housing market, right? The fact is, if you really take a look at housing since 1965, there's only been a handful of years where homes have gone down in price. So maybe since 65, I want to say maybe 4 years, homes have dropped from the year before. If you take a look at 5-year periods, only once houses haven't recovered in less than 5 years. So it drops, but eventually it recovers. So the question then becomes, why do home prices continue to go up? And you have to look at really what drives the housing market. Is it interest rates? Yes, to some degree, interest rates play a role. But if you really take a look at interest rates over the last 30 or 40 years, they've had their ups and downs, but they tend to have averaged 5, 6, 7%, right?
Yeah.
But what really drives home prices is household formation, right? In the 1980s, there were about 80 million households in the United States. Today there's over 120 million households, right? And households, for your listeners, a household is people living together, right? Don't have to always be a husband and wife and 2 children. It could be, other people living with them. But households are created through immigration. They're created by your children, moving out and creating their own household. Sadly enough, they're created by divorce, and other things. So as households grow, people want a place to live.
Right.
And as you're speaking very much as an industry insider, right? What happened in 2008, the mortgage business. You have to remember the average person isn't thinking about a house as an investment. Right? There's a small percentage of people in the United States that are overly consumed with our prices going up and what's happening. You really have to take your head out of that and think about these are people, for the most part, who are renting. And what's important to them about buying a house is not always it's got to be worth more in 2 years. Their biggest concern, and we've talked to a lot of renters, their biggest concern is, look, I have no idea if my landlord's going to come to me in 6 months and say, I'm not renewing your lease. Yeah. And now what do I do? Right. So they're concerned, and it's happened to people, right?
It's shelter versus investment, right? So,
but it's
peace over your head.
It's peace of mind, right? There are people listening here who say, "Gee, I remember when my landlord came to me and said, hey, my sister's moving back into town, and she's gonna, I'm gonna rent her my place. I'm not renewing your lease in 2 months," and you're in panic mode.
Yeah.
It's consistency of expense, right? If you're renting, you have no idea year to year if they're going to increase the rent. Right. 5, 10, 15%. But if you have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, yes, your taxes might go up, but for the most part, you know what that payment's going to be, right? And then from a livable perspective, I can do what I want. I can hang pictures. I can paint walls. I don't have to worry about going to my landlord and saying, "Am I allowed to?" It's yours.
Yep.
Not to mention you're deducting the interest and taxes, and a lot of your payments going towards principal. So that's what really drives the housing market: is people are looking for a place to live.
Yep.
And right now, I would also caution your listeners, you hear a lot of rhetoric around home sales have slowed. Just because home sales have slowed does not mean that prices are also dropping to the same degree, right? Why have home sales slowed? One, the pace, prior to COVID, there were about 5 million houses sold a month in the United States. COVID, we got to 6 million. Now we're down to 4. So we couldn't keep up at that pace. But they've also slowed because you have a lot of people in America who own a home with a 2.5,
Yep.
3,
That's it.
3.5%
Nail on the
mortgage,
head.
and they're not selling their house because it's
Can't.
it's too
Well,
expensive.
well, we can't. And when they bought those homes, many of them, year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, real estate prices were on the upswing. So now you're boxed out, right? You understand this? The part of the challenge today in today's market is there's not a lot of inventory. There means there's not a lot of houses for sale. Those people who would consider selling that get into their home 2 years ago and have just realized, hey, I can't make the payment anymore, or my job has changed. They're boxed out. They're boxed out because if they try to sell, they don't have the same equity when they bought.
Well,
And that payment that they have to go to some other property, even if it's $100,000 less, right?
Right,
We
it's
know
gonna
the
go up.
math is the math that rate at 6.5% is going to give them a higher payment. So they're like, well, I got nothing to do. So we have to, if you're a homeowner, you got to do your best, hunker down, make your payments, and do the best to survive, I guess, in certain.
Well, yeah,
examples.
it's like you said, it's your home.
Right.
To chunk this down, it's really not that complicated, right? Home prices are only driven by one thing, which is supply and demand. And to put it in maybe the listener's vernacular, you decide to post something you own on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
If nobody is interested in it, you have no choice but to lower the price.
Yep. Right.
But if 10 people want to buy it, you might actually get more than you asked, right? So it's all about supply and demand, right? I keep going back to Warren Buffett because I love him, but Warren once said, look, if you own a bike and nobody wants it, that's the definition of worthless, right? It's not worth anything, right? If you own a bike and 5 guys want it, all right, now we got a little bidding war. But in the housing market, you heard the old stories, right? 40 people were bidding on. You don't need 40 people. You really need 3 or 4. Right. So on the demand side, as we talked about, you've got more households being formed. There's a demand to buy houses. On the supply side, people with low interest rates are not selling their house. The elderly who in the past would move into an assisted living center or in some cases pass away, right? People are living into their 90s in their home. So those houses aren't coming on the market.
Yep. Good point.
The relocation market is a fraction of what it was because everybody can now work from home, right? Friends of mine, I got a job in, working for some company in Texas. You're moving to Texas. No, I'm working from home.
Right.
Yeah. So they're not going.
Yeah.
And then the fourth opportunity is new construction. And as we know in America, with a lot of the environmental issues and land you can't build on, it's been challenging for builders, not to mention materials and labor, but they're not able. So if the demand is still there and the supply is not jumping up in any way, shape, or form, prices should stay fairly stable. They'll drop a little bit, but I don't see anything falling off the table.
And I guess my question would be like, what do you think would trigger that? Because all those things you mentioned don't seem to be ever going away. Like people living longer will just continue to grow. People staying in their home because they're working from home. What do you think would a trigger be for a price to change?
For prices to drop?
Yeah.
Good question. I guess if rates did spike dramatically higher from where they are today.
Right.
Could that happen? Rates in the early 80s were in the 16% range. Could the United States fall into such a recession that we could go there again? It's possible, but not probable.
What would create such a dramatic interest rate spike?
Depression.
Yeah. Do you guys, well, I'll ask you, do you feel, you're here, you rent, do you feel your friends think about home ownership, talk about it, like they really are actively going to try to do it? If you had 10 friends, what's the percentage of those people that have buying a home on their mind?
Well, I think the narrative nowadays for my generation is a little different than yours in that like you guys felt like, okay, you save up enough money and we're going to buy a house one day. Our narrative is like we may not have to. We may rent forever, or we're going to be moving so much we don't need a location base where we're locked in. And not to say that would be me, but I think we're a little more wavy on that, which is interesting.
Which
contributes to what we're talking about.
Well, it contributes to it,
Right.
but my experience, which is just the limited people I know a lot of young people who felt that way.
Right.
And not everybody goes to this step in life, but when they go to a certain stage, it changes, and that stage is married, and then especially when you have kids, because when you have kids, kids do things like Little League and Girl Scouts and school, and you now all of a sudden feel yourself you want to be part of a community, and they want a yard to play in, and so things change, and you say, wow, this apartment lifestyle that I've been in is really not conducive. Some people, obviously, it's great for, right? But a lot of people decide, I really want to be part of a community, and I want to have a yard, and get my kids in school and activities and things like that. So it does really change.
Yeah, and I live in this apartment complex, and I see families here, and all respect to them, but I feel the same way. I'm like, I would never want to raise a family here. I feel like I would want to be in a suburban area and, like you said, have the yard and the community. But I guess that's another thing. People nowadays tend to think less about having kids, and it's more of like an option to not ever have kids. That's just from what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, personal choice. I can give you my daughter as an example. My daughter was living in Washington D.C. And a 1-bedroom apartment in Washington D.C. is roughly $2,200 a month for anything decent. So that's your expense, right? $2,200 a month is out the window. She ended up buying an apartment, and after yes, she had to have a down payment, the whole bit. But after her down payment all said and done, her monthly payment is somewhere around $1,600 a month.
Really?
So you might look at that and say, wow, she's saving $600 a month. But keep in mind, of the $1,600, about $450 to $500 is paying down her equity, right? So you take that off the table. So now she's not saving $600, she's saving $1,100.
Right.
Then you take the tax deductibility of the interest that she has, and how that's reducing her taxes, and you say, math-wise, wow. And short term doesn't really matter. And again, I'm in the business. But when you sit down with a young person, you say, okay, if you rent for the next 10 years, here's what it's going to cost you. If you buy, here's what it's going to cost you. Even if your house never appreciates, it's pretty staggering.
So when you talk about the tax deductibility, let's be helpful here, so you understand what that means. You have your gross earnings, and you have interest that you're paying over the course of the year. At the end of the year, you get a statement from your mortgage company. That comes right off the top. That lowers, okay? So if it was $20,000 in interest, you made $100,000, you're going to start baseline at 80.
Right, you're going to pay taxes on $80,000, not $100,000.
That's right. Yeah. And there's different vehicles of investment or second home, primary, et cetera. They are factored in differently, right? But you'll always have that, at least unless something.
And from what I see, the major reason for young people renting is, and I've seen this with my daughter where it's been a little adjustment. The major reason for people to rent is I want to put the key in the door and leave. Yeah. If the water heater breaks, I want to call my landlord. If the lock is broken, I want to call him. And that's certainly a great benefit. Sure. No doubt about it. You don't have to worry about anything. Yeah,
and that's exactly what I did. This lease that I'm in right now, that was the debate. Do I buy something here? Do I put money down and then pay maybe a little bit less or more? But then you're sacrificing a lot of things. One of them is location. One of them is the actual building itself. You don't get the amenities if you're I wouldn't be able to afford this if I bought it, type of thing. Right. So it's for the short term that I'm here, I might as well live the life I want.
And this is also a very helpful tip. Let's say you did buy this. Now you're here, you bought it, you own it, and you're in a market today that is not putting you in a position to sell right away, right? It's not as desirable as maybe a year ago. Well, now you don't like the area for whatever reason. Now you're stuck. Right? So it's a good thing you test drive it a little bit. You should rent. You should go experience the neighborhood, the flavor, and then determine where you want to be. There are plenty of people, young and old included, make those mistakes. We have friends that are going to Florida. Right. Everyone wants to go to Florida. Well, I want to go here. I want to go there. Well, shouldn't you rent first to see if you like the area? The community? I think so. And then when you determine, it's not Jupiter I want to be in, it's West Palm. It's not West Palm, it's Sarasota. So when you find that, then you're like, all right, good. Now I know where I want to buy.
It's funny. When my wife and I were looking at our first house years ago, my dad said, don't just go with the realtor and look at the house and make a decision. Mm-hmm. He said, go buy that house during the day, during the week. Go buy at night. Go by on a Saturday, just see how the neighborhood changes. Sure. And I think the cautionary tale for the younger generation is the old adage of location is not going away. Mm-hmm. And you have a lot of amenities here. Those amenities are created for a reason. Yeah. If they didn't have it, you would rent here. Sure. Right? Yeah. You wouldn't be in this location.
Sure.
So when you go to look to buy a house, a lot of times homes that are in a less desirable location, they're the same houses that are going to have the granite countertops and the stainless steel appliance because they're trying to get you to buy a house in a less desirable. Give up that stuff. right? You can always buy a stainless steel stove and you can put in granite countertops, but you cannot change your location.
Right.
And that's what you really need to think about that. When you're shopping for a house, don't think about anything I can change, right? You can't change your location. You can't change the size of your lot. You can't change the town you live in.
Can't
right?
change your neighbor.
Can't change, right. But if you say, well, the car doesn't have a garage. Okay, well, if there's a room and you can build one, then who cares? You can build a garage, right?
Right.
But focus on the stuff that you're not able to change.
Yeah. That's it's almost like, the dangling carrot in front of your face saying, oh, well, this is why I want to live here. And that's the other reason. Well, the reality is too, a lot of these luxury apartment buildings, I asked to buy and you can't. Like
right.
they have enough cash flow. I asked to pay in advance for a discount. They do nothing. So the reality is if I wanted to buy in this area, I'm not getting anything close to this anyway. Like that. So that's a really good point. And that's why I'm happy I'm renting here anyway, just to understand the area.
Sure.
Because I wouldn't have known that. I would have said, oh, Jersey City, this building's really great. If I wasn't here, then I'm just going to buy right next door. But right next door could be a very different area than where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the opportunities, current date 2023, if you had a guess, here's the forecast part of our conversation. Market is at this point today, which I believe is on a downward slope, right? Mm-hmm. Because I know price reductions are prevalent, so on. Where does it go from here to the end of the year?
Well, again, I want to be careful with the narrative, right? So
Sure.
again, the narrative, home sales are slowing.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a narrative that look at the price reductions. I would tell people, go into a website like Zillow, and what you might see is that the house was just reduced by $40,000. So, oh my gosh, it's a bad market. But then when you look at the numbers and you see these people bought the house in 2018 for $400,000, and they're asking $650, and now they're down to $610.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason why there was a price drop is because their asking price was not realistic, right? So they're coming back down to reality. Mm-hmm. Do I think prices, first, and real estate's local. So, we'll see some markets going down 2%. We'll see some markets maybe going down 5 or 6%.
Yep.
I don't think you're going to see markets adjust more than maybe the most 10% for maybe those markets that were just completely overheated. But I do think there's still a demand. There's not a lot of supply. And, unless you have to sell your house, you can also choose to wait it out.
Yeah, and price point matters too, right? Your $1 million beach house is going to be affected differently, to your point, than let's say your condo in Jersey City or your home in the suburbs somewhere.
Yeah, we used to reduce our credit ratings on second homes when I was at Wells Fargo. And the thinking there was if people lose their job or get into a financial situation, they're going to get rid of their beach house, their mountain house, their ski house. Right. And we saw the exact opposite. We saw two things. One, there was a huge emotional attachment to their vacation home, right? They were holding on to that thing because in some cases people were like, look, I've dreamed of owning this ski house since I was 15 years old. Second is because I don't live there, I have the ability to rent it out. So you had people who said, I own a ski house in Colorado and my family uses it the entire ski season. Well, now because of some drop in the economy, recession, we're only going to use it for the month of February. We're going to rent it for January and March. And they have the ability to do that, which you don't have the ability to do with your primary residence. So you have a tool that allows you to keep a vacation home, which is why in many markets in America, we don't see those prices dropping as quickly.
That's interesting. I'm not in it as much as other people, but I never thought about the difference between a secondary and a first home from like a difference in price.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a stat, there may not be, because like you said before, if you look at the price cut and say, oh, wow, look at all these price cuts, it's a bad market, but it's probably just people overpricing. Like, I wonder if there's a ratio of what people, I feel like people used to be a little more realistic with their pricing and what they're asking for versus what they got. So maybe that, I wonder how much more dramatic it is now.
Yeah, it's, historically people have done a not such a great job, right? So what you really need to do is think about pricing your house is no different than we're in the middle right now of divisional playoffs in football. So congrats to the Bengals, Eagles, Chiefs, and
well, at the time of this
Niners.
airs, it'll probably be
Niners.
done. Yeah.
But the adage was it's no different than a quarterback throwing a ball to a receiver, right? You want to lead the receiver. So if the real estate market's going up and you think your house is worth $600, price it at $7 because that's where it's heading. Mm-hmm. But the real estate market's going down, you think your house is worth $600, price it at $580 and get rid of it, right? Don't chase the market down. right? So just get a little bit ahead of where the direction you think the market's
and
going.
the audience sets the market. To your point about the bicycle, if someone wants to buy the bike, okay, no one wants to buy the bike. It's not worth anything. So
that's a really interesting analogy. I've never heard it said like that. And the only comparison I have is like when I used to say that stuff with you all the time. I've never heard anybody say that.
You're not listening to me when I talk.
That's genius.
I always used to tell you, I said Joe Montana and Jerry Rice. Sure, I did. Joe Montana know where Jerry Rice was
John,
going.
my kids don't listen to me either. Yes,
He
really
gets so upset.
Why not?
No, but the only analogy I can give was a bunch of my friends a couple years ago and still are into like the NFT craze and like buying out these projects, pricing it at a point where they think it's going to skyrocket, and then take their wins where they can get them. And a lot of times, like you said, when you knew and realized that, oh shit, this price is dropping, let me not lose everything I had. Let me price it a little bit lower and just get out. And I feel like with houses, people are a little more stingy and like, I don't want to touch it. I want to wait for the market to bounce back. And it may never bounce back for the years that you're looking to sell this house.
Yeah, there's emotion. The other thing I think people miss is that they buy a home and they live in it for 6, 8, 10 years, and they go to sell it.
Right.
And a realtor or a home stager comes in and they say, well, let me give you a list of the 20 things that need to be done. Mm. It's really important when you buy a house that you're ready to buy a house, because you really should do improvements every single year. So when you do get to the point where you're ready to sell it, you don't have this massive to-do list now, right? And the important thing I think for people to remember is doing these projects are not about keeping your value. So when you go to sell that, that's part of it. But you also get to enjoy the new bathroom. You get to enjoy the new kitchen, right? So do it while you're living there. Don't do it just to sell the house, right? But it's really, I always tell people when you're thinking about selling your house or pricing your house, the first thing you should do is you should go visit 4 other houses that are similar to yours in your area that are for sale, because that's your competition, right? And if you walk into these houses and go, that's a lot nicer than mine, then you need to lower your price, check right? Yourself. Because that's what you're comparing you to. Yep. But many people don't do that. They just get emotionally, to your dad's point, they get emotionally attached to their house. They think it's worth maybe more than it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you hear all of this, what do you think? Is there anything else that potentially?
Well, the conversation today, what it opened my eyes to is that there's a lot of there's a lot of factors that go into the housing market that I would have never thought about. Like you just said, well, average age of living is increasing and people not going into assisted living. Like those are things I would have never thought about, but they are huge factors. It's not just it's not just numbers on a paper.
Right.
So I think it opens my mind a little bit more to what really is going on.
Yeah, and I think people don't think about that household formation, right? So 80 million families in America in 1980, which people like your dad and I feel like 1980 was yesterday.
Yeah.
And then you say there's over 120 million today, and you go, holy cow. I mean, I don't think of America, maybe because we live in New Jersey. New Jersey's been developed for a long time, but I don't really feel like I sat through a world where there were 40 million households created, right? I don't remember, you just don't feel it or see it. But
right.
All of those people need a place to live, right?
Can't live with your parents the rest of your life.
That's for sure. That is for sure. Now, so you mentioned it before. So you're not, the difference between 08 and now is not even comparable.
No, like I said, 08 was just a crazy time. Mortgage-backed securities were created. They weren't what they were.
Can you explain what a mortgage-backed security is?
So, you go back in the day, the example I give people is you think about the movie It's a Wonderful Life. You had the Bailey building a loan. People deposited money, and then the bank lent that money out to people for mortgages, and banking was pretty boring. It was kind of how it worked.
He doesn't know It's a Wonderful Life. There's no
Yes,
chance.
he does.
No
You know the movie It's a Wonderful Life?
No chance.
You need to talk to your parents.
You got to reset that.
So a building and loan or a savings and loan or a bank, for majority of our time back in the early 1900s, 1800s, people would deposit money. Mm-hmm. And then when somebody wanted to come in and buy a house, they would use that money to lend to them, and they would pay back interest. And that interest would go towards their expenses, their profit, and some of the interest would go to pay people who had their money on deposit. It was an in and out.
Money in, money out.
Yeah.
Yep.
So a guy by the name of Lou Ranieri came up with the idea of saying, you know what, people want to invest in bonds, right? So when a municipality or a township or a state wants to borrow money, they create a bond. And they say, hey, we're going to build a new municipal building, and we're raising $5 million, and it's a 10-year bond, and it pays 5%. Mm-hmm. And they were seen as very safe, boring investments. Well, Lou got the idea and said, you know what? Nothing's safer than real estate. Real estate never goes down. So we're going to take all these mortgages and package them together, and we're going to call it a mortgage-backed security. And these 1,000 mortgages pay an average of 6%, and you can invest in that, right? So you can say, I want to. So that's what happened. But as I said before, there's only so many homes being sold in the United States, right? There's only so many mortgages being created. So as people really liked that, the demand increased. And they said, hey, I want to buy more of those mortgage-backed securities. And bankers along the way said, well, gee, we don't really have any more mortgages to put in there that are good quality mortgages. So let's lower the down payment required. Let's lower and they started putting riskier and riskier loans.
That was the beginning of the end.
And where it fell apart was they didn't disclose that. So the rating agencies continued to tell people that these were AAA, they were safe.
Right.
And, in order to look under the hood, you'd have to really look at every mortgage to see, wait a minute, half that stuff is garbage. And when those people stop making their payments, this thing's going to fall apart, which is eventually what happened, right? There were too many people getting loans who didn't have good credit, didn't have a good down payment, didn't have a job or a low-paying job and couldn't afford it. And once they stopped making their payments, the bonds eventually cratered.
And then the banks didn't have the money to then pay out the interest rates.
Well, the banks that held, were long on these mortgage-backed securities went under.
Right.
And it just becomes a domino.
Well, it started with Bear Stearns.
Well, that's
Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers.
Right. Yeah.
I was watching
Morgan Stanley.
Yeah.
Too Big to Fail yesterday, and I was asking myself the question: why were all these banks so adamant on bailing out Lehman? Like, why was that why did they care so much about bailing out another bank?
Well, in a lot of cases, they had business ties to Lehman. So if Lehman went under, they went under. Right. There were a lot of people that, Lehman backed a lot of hedge funds, right? So if Lehman goes under, my hedge fund goes under. They were the ones that insured my hedge fund. Mm-hmm. So, Wall Street's, very, very tied together. Mm-hmm. If you watch The Big Short, if you watch, I recently watched the Madoff special on Netflix. Mm-hmm. What drives a lot of this, unfortunately, is greed. It's just people who, get greedy and they forget to look at the facts and the data, right? They're blinded by making, what's the old adage? If it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Mm-hmm. It was too good to be true. It was just too easy in both those scenarios, in the Madoff scenario and in the Big Short scenario. And sometimes when it's too good to be true, you got to say,
pump the brakes and
I got to.
But what could you guys have done at that point? Like, you two both. What I'm hearing is you heard it, or you felt it coming late 2007. But what could you really do?
If you watch The Big Short, you'll find out it was really hard to do anything. Even the ones that saw it coming, nobody wanted to listen. And the reason why people don't want, again, just to draw the analogy, if you look at the Madoff thing, there were same scenario. There were people who were telling people, hey, something isn't right here, right? Mm-hmm. The market was down 5% this year, and Madoff made 30. Like, how can that pop? But there were so many people who were making money that you just say, well, I'm not asking any questions. I don't know, but until it's too late.
We did work in Wells. They were very conservative. We were not doing a lot of the high risk, low down payment. We just took them off the shelf. We weren't doing them, right? We did them, but we weren't doing them. And that was the leadership's decision at the time, which I think, to answer your question, that's what we did as a company. What we could do individually is nothing. You're going to keep writing loans. You're going to keep doing what you can to feed your family, right? To make sure that, in my case as an originator, in his case as a leader and a manager, that I met my own standards for what I wanted out of my livelihood, right? There was that self-imposed quota in my mind that I'm going to do X amount to equal Y in terms of what goes in my bank account. So that was me. But with everything taken into consideration, there's that. In 2008, it was the Wall Street versus Main Street. So Main Street is downtown America, the consumer. And to answer your question, well, why didn't they want to bail out Bear Stearns or Lehman? Because many of the consumers just felt like, well, why? It was okay when you guys were making all that money. Tough luck. You made bad investments. And that, while that is true, it wasn't in totality the reality of what was happening, because the financial infrastructure of the world, forget about just America, for the world, was predicated on what happens to these institutions. AIG was the big insurer of and buyer of a lot of these. They are not a bank. So differently than Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was bailed out before it was called a bailout. before TARP money was introduced. That was early in 2008. Then Lehman hit the skids. And then it was like, well, sorry, you're gone. And Jamie Dimon tried to, with Citi and with JP Morgan tried to buy and all these things. And if you watch these movies, which is historical and educational and informative, truly help us today, because today those same things shouldn't happen and probably won't happen because there's some there's some restrictions and some things that have been implemented differently today. So that's good, but you don't know, right? Your next.
Well, I think
you don't know what's going to happen.
So the question you asked Johnny was what could we have done differently? I think the question that I think is important is what do you learn from it? And I think what you learn from it, and history repeats itself, is not to follow. Yeah. So in that example, just because everybody else is doing subprime loans or just because everybody is doing something and making lots of money doesn't mean that you should just blindly follow, right? You should stop and say, does this make sense for me, right? Do the numbers make sense? Does it seem to be right? And when something doesn't smell right, you got to scratch your head and go, I don't know. And it's hard because your friends are over there driving fancy car, and you're like, what's going on, right?
Right.
But I think it's important again for the younger generation to take that. It's no differently than all my friends are getting rich off of Bitcoin or all my friends are doing. Okay, it doesn't mean that you should do it. You make your own decisions. You're not always going to be right. Back to what I said earlier, right? Life is fair, not in our time frame. So you may feel like, my gosh, I feel like I'm making good decisions for the better part of a year, yet my friends live in a nicer apartment, driving fancy cars, living it up at the nightclub. But what is going on, right?
Right.
Okay, that's short term, right? Life's it's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. So I know it's hard short term to do the right thing, but if it doesn't seem right and you've actually invested the time to do the math, right? You never want to say, hey, I invested in ABC and it's been doing great, and have somebody say, oh, well, tell me about ABC. Oh, I don't really know what they do. What? This is your money, right?
That's a big one that I've even felt prey to. It's just we want to invest and close our eyes and say, it's making me money, I don't care. But if you don't really understand, then you're probably throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks, which is what has happened in the cryptocurrency space, and you've seen the dramatic drop now. And then you see the same talks where it starts to stabilize and creep its way back up, and it's like, oh, it's coming back, guys. And you get that same sensation of, oh, I missed it on the first one, I'm going to get it on this one. And you're chasing something you really don't understand.
Well, and so if you think about your dad's point about 2008, you think about Bernie Madoff, you think about Bankman-Fried and the cryptocurrency. You hear people time and time say this, right? Well, it won't happen to me,
right?
Until it does. And when it does, and this may not be a professional term, but it sucks. Because when it happens to you, you look in the mirror and go, oh my God, I never even met this guy. I didn't even do what was I thinking? Like, God, right? Now, it's kind of like I say to when my kids studied for a test, I would say, look, here's the deal. If you do poorly on a test and you say to yourself, you know what? I studied like crazy. I gave it my all. I, didn't go to that party on Friday. Okay, you should be perfectly happy, right? Look, I didn't do well, but there's nothing else I could have done. But if you fail a test and you say to yourself, yeah, you know what, I kind of blew it off. Yeah, I would be disappointed. Right. So if you have an investment and it goes south and you say to yourself, look, I did my due diligence, right? I asked questions about this guy. I Googled this guy. I met him. I asked to interview 3 of his clients. I looked at look, there's nothing you could have done. But if you have an investment and it goes south and you say to yourself, did I really know then you only have yourself to blame, right?
That's a really good point. And
by the way, we've some of us have been there. You have that sick feeling in your stomach when you go, God, I was too busy doing other stuff, right? I was too busy with everything else in life that was so important. I didn't have a couple hours. This was my money, right?
Yeah, and then it's like the one little thing that you were like, why? How did I not see that prior to?
And you're not going to see everything. You're going to make everybody makes mistakes, right?
Yeah.
If we saw everything, like it would be
easy.
No,
it's true. Nancy Porter says it best. No one's going to care more about your money than you.
Nancy Porter, who also is known as my grandmother.
Well, and your money is, I think the younger generation sees money as something you spend, right? Your money is your army, right? So no different than any country. If you have a really big army, you can go out there and kick butt and take some names.
Yeah.
So if your army is 10,000 soldiers or $10,000, you can put that $10,000 to work. Now, if you decide, well, you know what, I want to get a car, I want to do this, and you deplete your army from 10,000 down to 4, you got a much smaller army. So, and whatever money you spend, you're depleting your army, which I know sounds kind of a strange analogy.
No, that's a great analogy, actually.
But it's just less people you have to send out there, right? I mean, if I have 10,000 and you have 4, I'm going to beat you all day.
Yeah,
it's not even a close fight because you decided. And the
unless you have 300 Spartans.
Well, and the message I think for the young people here, which I heard not too long ago, is the difference between being old and wealthy and being old and being a little bit short is 2 words, right? It's called deferred gratification. Now, the first word is really important, deferred. Doesn't mean you don't go out and treat yourself, right? What it does mean is, I want a BMW. There's a difference between going and getting it today versus saying, you know what, I'm going to wait a couple of years until I save some money. And the people who defer gratification, the people say, I can wait to get that bigger. They end up doing a lot better in life.
Yeah.
So they don't. I think the fallacy here is that they somehow deny themselves these luxuries in life. They don't deny it. They just defer it until they feel like they've earned it or they're in a financial position to get it.
Right.
And when you defer, what happens is your army's out there at 10,000 for a couple more years, right? Eventually you'll spend it, but you're keeping them out there for a few more years.
Yeah.
Really good analogies this guy's got.
What do you think in terms of when you...
You're overwhelmed right now? You're
No,
overloaded?
not at all.
You're overloaded?
This is great.
You want to take some notes?
Overload? Is it...
No, not at all. I think this is very, actually, it made sense of a very complicated topic. Or what you said, it's really not that complicated. But you made sense of it just putting it in layman's terms. And the analogies were super helpful. And it does raise awareness for a guy that's my age, mid to older 20s, to realize, okay, hey, money is coming in right now, but I have a long life to live. And the army that I think is really big is not big compared to what a really big army is. And so spending money right now has to be, you got to do it with caution.
Right. So yeah, back to your point about a guy in their 20s, right? I'm going to imagine that there are a lot of people who are listening who are similar situation to you and are thinking, take out a pad and a piece of paper and write down anybody that you think might help you. Could be your mom or dad, but it could be an uncle. It could be a neighbor. It could be some guy, and preferably people who have some experience, right? People in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Pick up the phone. Hey, Mr. Jones, I lived down the street from you when I was a kid, and I'm thinking about getting into investing, and, can I pick your brain?
Yeah.
I will tell you, the majority of people you call are going to feel happy that you called them. They're going to be thrilled to share. But to learn from people who have been through it, who can tell you, here are the mistakes I made, here's what I did. I mean, you're going to give yourself such a head start, it's going to be invaluable, right? And back to, so how long does it take to make that list? Maybe 30 minutes. How long does it take to make those phone calls? Maybe 30 minutes. How long are you going to spend talking to 4 people? I don't know. Call it an hour cup of coffee each. So your investment is maybe 6 or 7 hours. The information you're going to get by investing 6 or 7 hours, right? There are people listening who spend 6 or 7 hours binge watching Breaking Bad in the last couple of years, right? I mean, but you have to do it, right?
That's a great point.
Good point. Ask people for money, you get advice. Ask for advice, you get money twice. That's Pitbull. Right. So I think that this was a really great topic. I think that there is a lot I learned today. I thought it was a good refresher, if nothing else. Greg Gwizdz, you're, again, a friend, a mentor, a lot of things that everyone in their lifetime should have when you align with people, the right people. So I thank you for taking the time and coming. G&D Consulting is kind of where you hang your hat now, right? So anybody who wants to find Greg, you can go on LinkedIn. You can check him out there. And so, Johnny, unless you have something else that you want to...
So can I segue your...
Oh, yeah.
So you're asking me to bring this little gift.
Oh, yeah. We almost forgot.
What's your... Again, like I said, it's a little smaller than I thought.
Is it razors, shaving cream? What is it?
No, but it segues into what you just said, right? You said, everybody should have a mentor or a friend, whatever, right? So it's just a little plaque on the back. It does say on the back, Johnny drinks. I think I wrote, no truer words were spoken from me, but so the saying, I'll read it to you. It says, a friend is one of the nicest things you can have, and one of the best things you can be. So, for the people listening, I just want to share a couple of things. One is friends are really important. And not everybody's going to be your friend. You're going to have a lot of acquaintances. You're not going to have a lot of friends. But when you think back to all your opportunities, whether it's your neighborhood, where you work, where you went to high school, you have so many opportunities to make friends. Right. Finding those people who, you connect with, who you trust is really important. And over time, people lose their friends because they just don't stay in touch. And that's sort of the second part of this, right? Everybody wants to have friends. Having friends is great. But the second part, right, that says one of the best things you can be, that's asking yourself, am I a good friend?
Yes.
Do I have their backs? And I talk to people who say, oh, Mike and I are great friends. You know what? I really need to call him. What do you mean you really need to call him? How long does it take to make a phone call to your friend, right?
Yeah.
So, have friends, cherish friends, keep them for your life. But ask yourself, are you being a friend? Because that's really the most important part. Because if you are, you'll keep those friends forever.
Come on, give me a hug.
I got my